And I pressed him. I said, guys, I really want to know. I'm really interested in this. Finally, one of my guys raises his hand, one of my superstar programmers, as you mentioned. And he says, I said, Gil, what do you think about this idea? And he says, blood, mayhem, murder.
That's apt. That sounds about right.
He says, do not pull me out of my office. Don't put me out in a big open room. Don't make me share a computer with another human being. And please, for God's sakes, please don't make me share my code. It's my code.
Oh.
And I said, Gil, we're a public company. I'm pretty sure it belongs to the shareholders. He's like, whatever, Rich. Now, so that was the first... That was the first blush, just like you'd expect, right? I mean, this is a team of heroes.
Absolutely.
And, no matter how much overtime, and they were all working tons of overtime. It's amazing how we get used to pain-filled systems, right? Chinazam, you probably saw this in the financial industry. You're going crazy. You're combing home at night. EJ's asking you how your workday went, and you're like, it was horrible. But you stay for whatever reason, right? Maybe it feels like you're needed, or you're a hero, and we like to be heroes and that sort of thing. Well,
say that again, Rich. It's amazing how we're used to building failed systems. Is that what you said?
Yep.
That's so powerful.
I wanted to just add on, this is the thing I bang my head all the time about high performance, where this nonsense where people keep pushing, hustle, 24/7. And it's what you just said. There is a period where you're not producing anything. You're putting in more bugs, but somehow we keep getting these hero things. Like if you go and actually study high performance athletes, the reason they high performance is they know when to rest. They know when to recover. They know how to rejuvenate themselves. But somehow, I don't know who did this in the corporate space, this 24/7 nonsense, but we have somehow flipped it that no, you work 24/7 and you push and grit, and that's how you, and it's absolutely nonsense. It doesn't work, but it's here to stay. Everyone buys into it. You can't get people to not put, you try and tell somebody in the corporate space to go and take a rest when a huge deadline is, they'll look at you like you've gone crazy. Like, why would I do that? I'm just going to go and drink 4 more cups of coffee and push through.
And you can't tell me that the world's best athletes, no matter what sport, don't have a pair partner in a coach, somebody who's saying, that's enough for today. We'll come back to it tomorrow. Or here's what I want you to do to get ready for the game, right? I want you to rest. I want you to focus in your head space. I want you to get ready. They're not saying 10 more miles on the track. I want to wear you down before you get into the game.
Are you ready to dive deep into meaningful discussions, explore personal stories, and gain practical insights that can transform your approach to mental fitness? Well, you're in the right place. Welcome to the Real Talk Mental Fitness Podcast, where open conversation and authentic connections come together to empower your mental well-being. I'm your host, Chinazam, and I'm so excited to have you here with us today.
Okay, so this is another episode of Real Talk, and I have to say today that I may lose myself a little bit because I'm over the top excited at the guest that we have today. And I didn't even realize how much this person inspired the work that I'm doing until a little while ago when it just hit me in the face that mental fitness means joy. And then I was like, well, where did I get the word joy from? And then I had to start going back, and it went back to 2020, middle of the pandemic, first time out as a family with our son. And I see this book in the library, and I remember it clear as day because the colors were so bright. I think even my son must have seen it as well. And I never knew reading that book what impact that book had. And Rich, I shared this with you. When I read the book, I was still cynical. I was still from my investment banking days, and I read the book. I was like, this can't possibly happen. This can't happen.
Okay.
Then I had a lived experience where it did happen, and then now I realized that I didn't even realize how much impact, but I'm now trying to bring joy into everything that people do. So real pleasure to have Richard Sheridan on our show, and he is the Chief Joy Officer, and I'm going to let him do his own introduction for everybody.
And Chinazum, I'm just curious, did you have a thought in your head that maybe what you were reading was a fiction novel rather than a business book?
That was the exact thought. I read the book and I was like, this is very interesting. Is this? And then EJ actually asked me, oh, what's the book about? What did you think? I was like, this guy thinks that we can bring joy into work and he's got all these stories, but I don't know if it can happen in reality. I think that's what I said, right?
Yes, it is.
I think that's what I said back in 2020. And yes, the universe must have been laughing at me because I do believe it is 100% possible. Not only do I believe it's 100% possible, I think it's 100% needed more than ever now.
That's true. Well, great to be with you both. And I think we're going to have a lovely talk today. And I can't wait to dive into the details. Do you want me to tell a little bit about my backstory to your audience?
Just a little bit, yeah.
Yeah. So I am a pure Michigan kid, as we like to say around here. I grew up north of Detroit, came to Ann Arbor to go to school, launched a career that looked perfect in the technology industry. My trade and training is as a software engineer, and I believe that would carry me for a lifetime. But by my mid-30s, I wanted out of the profession entirely. Even though the world was telling me I was doing a great job, I had all the worldly success, the raises, the promotions, the stock options, the title, the authority, the team size, the office. I had everything the world measures as success, and yet I wanted out. I wanted to get as far away from technology as I could. I was actually contemplating starting a canoe camp in the Boundary Waters of Minnesota and moving my wife and 3 daughters there. They still laugh at me to this day about that idea. I'm not sure they really realized how serious I was, but that's how far away from technology I wanted to get. And a lot of people wonder, like, what was going on? What was so bad? And it's like, no, it's the industry. It's everything. It's missed deadlines and blown budgets and poor quality and unhappy users and unhappy customers, unhappy team members. And I thought I was going to be pretty good at this profession. And I thought maybe I just don't have what it takes. And then I started looking around and realizing, oh my gosh, the whole industry suffers from the problems I'm having. How am I going to find an outlet given the canoe camp wasn't actually a practical idea because I loved my family enough that I wanted to stay with them. And the house over my head, the cars, the kids about to go off to college and all that sort of thing, I realized I was stuck. And then my inner optimist kicked in. I realized I was stuck in a room full of manure and there had to be a pony in this room somewhere. So I started digging my way out, and my journey out led me to authors and books, but not books on technology. I started reading books about how do we organize the humans more effectively. And that became my journey, my life journey. And in 1999, after I was a VP of R&D for a couple of years, I made big changes to a tired old public company and got back to, I didn't use the word then, but I certainly use it now. I got back to joy in my profession. And then in 2001, it was all taken away from me when the internet bubble burst. And while I could lose all the worldly stuff, and that was hard, they couldn't take away what I had learned in those 2 years. And that became the basis for a startup company I created in 2001 with my co-founder, James Goebel, called Menlo Innovations. And it was founded on a crazy big idea. We were going to end human suffering in the world as it relates to technology. And we wanted to return joy to what we believed was one of the most unique endeavors mankind has ever undertaken, the invention of software. And I'm sure we will get into the details, but know that we've been doing this for 23 years now, and we are back to the joy that should have always been there in the first place.
Wow. Maybe I'm going to let you.
I mean, where do I even start? Let's start with the mission, that vision that you had that was so bold and so big and so far from the reality. Like, what was it that enabled you to say that out loud?
You know, I think when you're my family name is of Irish heritage, and a lot of the longtime Irish families have what's called a coat of arms that usually has this Latin phrase on it. And my family name, the Sheridan name, the saying on the coat of arms says, "The stag at bay becomes a lion." And I asked my dad once, I said, what on earth does that mean? And he said, "Rich, a cornered rat fights." Yeah, the stag is a deer, and deer can be very docile creatures, and I think I'm a pretty docile creature, but I was backed into a corner. There was no escape, and I just came out fighting, and I fought for something that I found inside of me, something that I was thinking I had to let go of. And if I let go of it, I would literally let go of my soul. And it was this idea that, in particular, and I'll just say, I come from a software background, so my focus is around that. I always believed it was possible to work with pride, to create great software that actually delights the people it intends to serve. I believed it was possible to do that, and yet our industry wasn't doing that in any dimension whatsoever. And so that was what I was fighting for, was this return to a belief I had as a kid when I touched computers for the first time when I was little, and just my head exploded with both excitement and creativity and imagination. And I wanted to get back to that. I wanted to get back to what I believed was possible. And so when we talk about ending human suffering in the world as it relates to technology, we look at three groups. We look for the people who pay for software to be built. We look for the people who use the software every day. Remember, my industry is the one that calls everybody else stupid users. And then we write dummies books for those poor people. And then we get to them to self-efface. "Oh, you know me, I'm just a stupid user." It's like, no, it doesn't have to be that way. We can actually design software that works for human beings. And then I wanted to end the suffering for the people who do the work. The phrase 24/7 was invented in the software industry. And that was a work schedule. And that was not 3 shifts. Those were the same people. Microsoft was famous in the early days for people sleeping under desks, working every possible waking hour they could. And again, my belief was tired people make bad software, and we didn't want to make bad software.
That's powerful. I mean, the question that this comes from me is, okay, you wanted to end human suffering. Where did you go, and how did you think you were going to bring joy to work? Because especially that picture you just painted, 24/7. I worked in investment banking field, and then when I read your book, I just come through investment banking. I went through the financial crisis. I saw when Lehman's crashed, everybody with the cardboard boxes. I saw the fear that people have to put into you. What made you think it was even possible to bring joy into work?
There's probably a part of me that's just crazy enough to believe it's possible. And for me, it was actually a belief that it was possible. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know how to get there. But I have this wiring that says, keep looking, Rich, and when you see it, you will know you found it. And that's what happened to me in 1999. And I read a book by a fellow frustrated programmer named Kent Beck on a process he dubbed extreme programming, which is unusually named, but just highlighted a different way to organize software teams. And what he wrote made a tremendous amount of sense to me. I saw a video on an industrial design firm in California that's pretty famous called IDEO. And they did an episode on Nightline, watching them redesign a standard shopping cart in 5 days to make it more usable. And then I met a gentleman, my co-founder, James Goebel, who I had brought in as a consultant to help me with one thing, but he kept asking me these intriguing questions. He'd ask me silly questions like, "So Rich, what problem are you actually trying to solve?" And I kept like digging down. And I had to sort of dig through these layers of sediment of, I think I just want to teach my team new technical approaches. I think I want my team to, be better programmers and know modern techniques. And he kept digging down. He's like, what problem are you trying to solve? And when we finally got to the base of it, it was that we weren't doing good work. We weren't working with pride. We didn't know how to plan things properly. We didn't know how to predict the outcomes of the work that my team was doing. We didn't know how to gather the requirements for the people who would eventually use what we were creating. And all of these things felt almost intractable, almost impossible to solve. But very quickly, working with James, taking the concepts from that book and those videos, we found the basis for a system. And once it started working, and it was an amazing transformation, started happening within just a few short months. And all of a sudden, things started working the way I always thought they should. And the rest is history. That was back in 1999. And much of what you see at Menlo Innovations today looks almost identical to what was happening now nearly 25 years ago.
Okay. So once you started putting things together, the joy started to come out. But did you know it was joy at the time, or was it just?
It's funny. It's not a word I was using back then. I probably would have used happiness back then, but I have come to define the difference between joy and happiness. Happiness is important too, but I don't believe you can do the hard work that's required in almost any profession and actually be happy every minute of every day without medication.
I love that.
So for me, joy is a much longer arc. It is the work over a long period of time in teams, done well, people walking out the door feeling they were able to get meaningful things done at work, which was often denied my old teams. We were crazy. We were phones ringing off the hook with problems, missing deadlines, delivering poor quality, everybody walking out the door feeling like I did crap work today. I got nothing done today. And then all of a sudden we developed this new cadence where we were actually getting meaningful things done every single day. We weren't working crazy overtime hours anymore. If we needed more done, we could actually add more people to the team. I mean, I would say that's probably one of the key magical moments that I discovered was, wow, we can put more people in this team and actually increase the throughput. There's actually a law in the software industry that says you can't do that. It's called oh gosh, I was going to say Moore's law, but that's not it. It's shoot, I can't believe I'm not thinking of it right now. I apologize. But Brooks law. Brooks law says if you add more people to a late project, it will only make the project later. And that's not so much a law, of course. It's an observation over many decades. It says this is what happens. You increase the paths of communication. You add more people. You have to onboard them, and it takes so much longer to onboard them, and they don't actually know what the standards are you're supposed to use. So the project just gets later. So you avoid adding new people, and you end up in a hero-based environment. And the only way to scale a hero-based environment is to scale the heroes, and the only way to scale heroes is overtime. My fundamental belief is anybody who works more than 50-ish hours as a programmer starts putting in more bugs than they're taking out. It becomes this downward vicious cycle that you can't escape from. And so for me, let me just throw out two basic constructs to give us sort of practical ideas as to what we're doing at Menlo that's so different. Number one, all people at Menlo work in pairs. 2 people, 1 computer. Literally sharing a keyboard and a mouse. This isn't, here, come help me with my work. This is our work done together. So if the 3 of us were on a team, Chinazum, it'd be you and I for the first week because we switch these pairs at least every 5 business days. And the next week it'd be EJ and I. And the next week it'd be the two of you working with one another. And we'll keep rotating these pairs. And what happens when you do that is it trivializes onboarding. So bringing on new people is really easy. It increases the communication. You actually have to share your knowledge with another person. So you start tipping up knowledge through the whole team, sort of grow the team by an inch every week. It dramatically improves quality, because if you two are focused on a screen together and I'm typing and one of you is watching me and you're asking questions and I have to think out loud, it just naturally increases quality. There's been a lot of studies about this that have even been done on us that tell us, oh no, this is an incredible quality improvement mechanism. It also reinforces discipline. We have a particular way we work. And if I say, well, I'm going to just skip that way today, one of you two who's paired with me is like, oh, no, you're not. And so that construct we use throughout our team, not just for our programmers, is probably the most powerful managerial idea I've ever come across. I never really worked that way before. I had moments of doing that. And I remember those moments produced really good quality, but it wasn't systematic. It wasn't a plan. It was just like, hey, I'm really behind. Frank, can you come over here and sit with me, make sure I'm writing this code right? And it worked, but then you just, that was in a crisis and you just set it aside. Kent Beck was the one who described that practice of pairing. And he said, hey, if it works well in crisis, maybe it would work well all the time. And then the other big idea is this thing we call high-tech anthropology, and we could probably talk the whole hour just on that. But the idea is, if you want software to work for humans other than the humans who built it, you better study those humans in their native environment and take what you learn from them and build that into the design of the software.
Okay. The first one, when you said it, I don't know whether EJ was smiling, because we're now working together in collaboration. And just as you said that, having to work together, it can be very frustrating because you're doing something, the other person's telling you, why are you doing this all the time? But it does create magic. And now hearing you say that, I'm now realizing why the magic is, because instead of me just going off and putting bugs in whatever I'm doing, constantly having somebody who is questioning and I'm questioning them, it's like, I never realized, yeah, that is magical actually. You always, two heads are better than one.
Absolutely. I mean, that's definitely been our experience. But like, to your good point, it's not always easy to get to that realization, right? And I'd love to hear, like, when you roll this out initially, I mean, after a certain point, the wins were there, right? The results came in. It was clear that we're doing a lot better than we were doing before. But I can imagine that not everyone was an early adopter. I'm just picturing some rock star programmers who were thinking, Rich wants to bog me down with so-and-so, like, that's going to slow me down. It's going to make it harder for me. What were some of those like preliminary challenges that kept coming up, and how did you kind of communicate around that?
Well, so the first time I even suggested this to my team, I had them gather in a room and I said, hey guys, I've been reading this book. I'm curious, what would you think about this? And describe to them what I just told you about. Instantly, all of their eyes went down to the floor. They stopped making eye contact with me and they went dead quiet. And I pressed them. I said, guys, I really want to know. I'm really interested in this. Finally, one of my guys raises his hand, one of my superstar programmers, as you mentioned. And he says, I said, Gil, what do you think about this idea? And he says, blood, mayhem, murder.
That's apt. That sounds about right.
He says, do not pull me out of my office. Don't put me out in a big open room. Don't make me share a computer with another human being. And please, for God's sakes, please don't make me share my code. It's my code.
Oh.
And I said, Gil, we're a public company. I'm pretty sure it belongs to the shareholders. He's like, whatever, Rich. It's mine. Now, so that was the first... That was the first blush, just like you'd expect, right? I mean, this is a team of heroes.
Absolutely.
And no matter how much overtime, and they were all working tons of overtime. It's amazing how we get used to pain-filled systems, right? Chinazam, you probably saw this in the financial industry. You're going crazy. You're coming home at night. EJ's asking you how your workday went, and you're like, it was horrible. But you stay for whatever reason, right? Maybe it feels like you're needed, or you're a hero, and we like to be heroes and that sort of thing. Well,
say that again, Rich. It's amazing how we're used to building failed systems. Is that what you said?
Yep.
That's so powerful.
I wanted to just add on, this is the thing I bang my head all the time about high performance, where this nonsense where people keep pushing, hustle, 24/7. And it's what you just said. There is a period where you're not producing anything. You're putting in more bugs, but somehow we keep getting these hero things. Like if you go and actually study high performance athletes, the reason they high performance is they know when to rest. They know when to recover. They know how to rejuvenate themselves. But somehow, I don't know who did this in the corporate space, this 24/7 nonsense, but we have somehow flipped it that no, you work 24/7 and you push and grit, and that's how and it's absolutely nonsense. It doesn't work, but it's here to stay. Everyone buys into it. You can't get people to not, but you try and tell somebody in the corporate space to go and take a rest when a huge deadline is, they'll look at you like you've gone crazy. Like, why would I do that? I'm just going to go and drink 4 more cups of coffee and push through.
And you can't tell me that the world's best athletes, no matter what sport, don't have a pair partner in a coach, somebody who's saying, that's enough for today. We'll come back to it tomorrow. Or here's what I want you to do to get ready for the game, right? I want you to rest. I want you to focus in your head space. I want you to get ready. They're not saying 10 more miles on the track. I want to wear you down before you get into the game.
Yeah.
So going back to Gail really quickly, what was it that you said, you think, that finally that you saw that spark of acceptance or openness?
Like, I knew I was going to get resistance. I had only been with the company 16 years at that point. I was still the new kid on the block. I'm serious. So they're still gauging me after 16 years, like, oh, here's crazy Rich, and I knew what they were thinking. This is going to be the typical sort of failed experiment in any corporate change initiative is just wait him out. He'll lose sight of it. We'll get distracted. Some new emergency will come up, and this will all be fleeting. But I had 2 guys come to me after that meeting, Claire and Bob, and they said, you know what? We didn't want to say anything at the meeting because we could see where the emotions were going, but we'd like to try this. And so we had our first pair to experiment with, just to see what it worked. I didn't know it was going to work. I just had some strong suspicions based on my own experience. And so Claire and Bob tried it for 3 weeks. Now, intriguingly, Claire was a guy in my team who I'd known for a long time, and he'd worked for me for a long time. And he had told me weeks before that he was going to quit. And would I be a reference on his resume? Because he was as frustrated as I was, but he was down at the front lines. I'm way up in the executive, suite. But, we had a long-standing relationship. And so about 2 weeks into this experiment, Claire stops me in the parking lot on the way into the office. And he says, Rich, are you still going to pay me to work here? I said, what? He said, this pairing thing is working out so well, and I'm having so much fun, and we're getting so much done. It doesn't feel like work anymore. I'm not sure you should pay me. I'm like, blood, mayhem, murder. I will work for you for free. I was not getting lukewarm reactions to this experiment. And quite frankly, I have discovered over time that if you're looking for lukewarm reactions, you will never change. The energy is generated out at the edges of any change initiative. And so now I've got somebody to fight with and prove to, and I've got somebody willing on the other end. And there were a number of other things that I describe in the book that I did to get it working. But within about 3 months, the paths were changing in the carpet. They didn't walk into the office and go to their cube or office. They walked out to what we affectionately referred to as the Java factory at Interface Systems. And things had changed dramatically. And they changed for me because I was the hero-based leader. I used to have to be answer man every day. I remember I brought my youngest daughter in to work with me one day to watch her dad work, because that's going to teach her something about work life. And she's watching a VP work all day. Can you imagine a more boring day for an 8-year-old than to watch a VP work? I mean, what is it supposed to inspire her to, I can't wait to get to the office and work on emails all day or something. But at the end of the day, I knew her teacher was going to ask her the next day. I said, so Sarah, what did you learn? And this was my old self, not the new version, right? This was about 2 years before this big change. And she said, what I learned, Dad, is you're really important here. I said, what? She's 8. I mean, I said, what did you see? She said, well, I saw nobody here can do anything without asking you first. Man, talk about a dagger. Now, she's really proud. I'm instantly mortified because I'm looking across the table from this 8-year-old. I'm thinking, I don't want to miss the best parts of being a dad. And as I said, the only way to scale heroes, even executive heroes, is overtime. And I thought, I have taken a wrong route. The change actually had to start with me. I had to become a different kind of leader.
I am so gobsmacked right now because just that level of like ownership, it's really tough. And I can only imagine what that felt like for you, because it's one thing to acknowledge that, and then it's another thing to start dismantling what you built, in a sense, right? Because you've been working that way for such a long time, leading that way for such a long time. So you created this thing, and then this realization was the first time when you're realizing, maybe this wasn't the best approach after all. But to start that process of reimagining, I can only, tell us what was in what kind of things were you saying to yourself to navigate that process? What was that dialogue?
Can I add to that as well? Is where did you find the courage where did you find the courage? Because you're also in this big company structure where Crazy Rich, you're about to now start to dismantle a system. You're about to dismantle a system. So where did you find the courage?
Yeah, well, it came from probably 2 key sources. Number one, because one of my team members asked me that same question about 6 months into the change when we knew it was working. And this guy had been on the team for 30 years, right? I think he thought he should have been the guy in the VP position, but I got the job. And so I think he was watching me trying to figure out, like, could I have done what Rich did? Right? I mean, holy cow, in 6 months, we made this massive change. So he comes into my office one day and sits down with me, and he asked me the exact same question. He says, where did you get the courage to do this? He says, I get it now, it's working, but you had no idea at the beginning this was going to work this well. Where did that come from? And I said, David, it was easy. And he's like, how is that easy? You put everything on the line. You put the title, the job, the paycheck, the stock options, everything. I said, David, you're looking at the wrong thing. I said, what was at risk was in here. I knew I couldn't keep going like this for another 30 years. I was in my late 30s at that point. I had another 30 years of career ahead. I knew it would kill me. So I looked at him, I said, David, I realized that the risk of staying the same was far greater than the risk of change. So I wasn't running towards risk. I was running towards safety. And once you cross a bridge like that in your mind, you just start running faster and faster. And that's what I did. So that was one piece. The second piece was, and I think anybody who goes through what I did has to have this piece too. I had a boss, Bob Nero, CEO of Interface Systems. He was a fairly new kid on the block. He'd only been at the company about 5 years at this point. And I told Bob what I was thinking of doing. He was wise enough to have me check in with the board. It was a public company, and even a couple of major stockholders. So Bob knew how to create a safety net for me. As soon as he saw that safety net was there, he was right there behind me every step of the way. Anytime I got frustrated, anytime I doubted, anytime I slowed down, Bob's gentle hand was on my shoulder, whispering in my ear, I got you covered, Rich. You're doing the right thing. Keep going.
Wow.
That extra ounce of energy when I needed it come from my boss. And I tell Bob to this day, he's still a close personal friend of mine. I say, Bob, I would not be who I am today doing what I'm doing without your support back in 1999. And he's kind of an aw shucks guy. He says, oh, no, Rich, you had all this inside of you. I said, yeah, maybe I did.
Yeah.
Without that heat shield around me when things might have gotten tough enough that he would have had to come down hard on me, he didn't. He protected me through that change. So those pieces were huge.
First, can I just say Bob gets Boss of the Year? I mean,
he does.
And we need to interview him
I'll
next.
send him this link and tell him to watch it, minute 42, Bob. You're the Boss of the Year.
Please.
All time, no, greatest boss of all time, not just
of all time. Yeah. Because let's be honest. I mean, you're right. You had a relationship with Bob, and I'm sure he'd seen your expertise and seen you work your magic, but this was an untested idea.
Mm-hmm.
And we've seen ideas with great conviction fall flat. And sometimes it gets suffocated because of that lack of a safety net. So I so recognize that he was able to understand your vision and use his insights and his knowledge to help make it a reality. But I can only imagine what that must have felt like for him, holding space for you like that and doing so consistently.
Yes, it was a crazy idea, but I think the other part of this, and I believe my chief storyteller component is a big deal here, is I was able to recount the failures of the past in a clear way.
Cool.
And so storytelling, whether you're telling stories of triumph or tragedy in the past, are critically important. And visionary stories about the future is how you lead. And I think in those first couple of years, I was building that storytelling instinct. And Bob was really just a really smart guy too. And, he would question me. It wasn't like, oh, just go carte blanche, spend whatever you want. No, he would come back and we would have great conversations about it. But it was peer to peer at that point. And I would say, Bob also modeled a version of leadership for me. Then that was, if you have good people working for you that you trust, let them run.
100%.
Powerful. That was really powerful.
I do love what you just said, though. The way you shifted the mindset of basically there was no other option because you'd be dead inside. And I feel that that's when transformation comes from people, when they can actually look at the hard truth of, if you carry on as this person, like, can you look yourself in the mirror? And then that's when it's like, no, you have to, what you said, go to the edges, because there's no other option of just playing the status quo and keeping that going. But your second point really hit me in that you can't really do the kind of change that you're talking about unless you have I don't know what we want to call the boss.
Heat shield.
Yeah.
Heat shield.
Yeah. I like that. You can't do it unless you have a heat shield, because I'm sure there were times where you were questioning yourself whether it's.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, it wasn't straightforward or clear, but, part of it is, where do you draw from? Where does your spirit and energy come from when you're facing what feels like an obstacle you can't overcome? And you just keep trying. Now, I will say, and it's a fun little story of, Bob and I didn't necessarily see eye to eye on the first minute of the conversation around this, because I kept going to Bob, speaking in my language. I said, Bob, this is what I want to teach my team. This is what we're going to do. And he kept asking me the typical CEO question. He's like, Rich, how much do we have to spend to get there? And I said, Bob, the spend doesn't matter. This is so important. He's like, Rich, you're scaring me. How much is this going to cost, right? And when I finally told him, he literally threw me out of his office. He says, there's no way we can spend that much money on this initiative. And I tried a couple more times, and he kept saying no and sending me away. And finally, I realized I'm speaking my language. I need to speak Bob's language. And I went into his office with my last try, and I said, Bob, I said, I've been sitting in on the executive team meetings, and I know we're running out of money. And you're counting on my team to build the next generation of products that's going to get us out of the mix. And he goes, you've got that exactly right, Rich. That's what I need you to do. I said, Bob, I'm not going to make it. We're going to run out of money before my team gets done, even with the new processes I'm talking about. So I know what needs to happen, Bob. We either have to do a secondary offering in the public markets to raise more money. We have to go private and get a private equity firm to take us over, or we have to be acquired. And I said, Bob, if any one of those three things happens, there is going to be a due diligence team. And because we're a technology firm, they're going to walk to my end of the building. They're going to look at my people, my process, and my products. And we're not going to pass muster. We won't get the money, and we'll go out of business. That's why I need to do this. And he literally signed off on it that afternoon.
Ooh.
Because what did I do? I learned to speak in terms that Bob understood. I had to drop all the technology stuff I was trying to create. I had to unify my vision with where he needed to take the company. And I will tell you, within a year, a due diligence team came into the company. They went right down to my end of the building. They looked at my people, my process, and the products, and they bought the company for 10 times the share price of the day that I had that conversation with Bob. That literally happened. That 10X happened in a year. And Bob, to this day, if we, maybe you should interview Bob at some point.
Absolutely.
I think we're going to have to.
The other side of the story, this is us style. Absolutely.
And Bob tells me to this day, he says, Rich, that transaction would have never happened had it not been for what you did with your team.
Wow.
But what you just said there about storytelling, I kind of call that where you use, and people don't like using the word spiritual, but you spoke to his spirit. You found a way to speak directly to his spirit. And that's just that. How did you do that?
The only thing I can draw from Chinazam is that 20 years of pain can be a pretty good teacher. And, and I will declare, you cannot learn everything you need to learn from pain. And I would say that in addition to that, my upbringing, my parents, my brothers, we had a family home that was just filled with love every single day. And my parents just showered love on us. We had a very modest upbringing. I know my dad would meet my mom on payday at the grocery store to hand over his paychecks. I'm pretty sure they were making ends just barely meet, but they never let us kids know that. And they just showered us with love. They made us believe in ourselves. And I know that those elements, and my dad had books all over the house, so I was always reading. He was a great storyteller, and I admired that about him. So, the fact that, I've somehow picked up that genetic thread from him makes me very proud and honored to be like my dad in that way.
And I love what you just said, because the next question I wanted to ask you was about mental fitness. And I want to get your take on mental fitness. And I'm going to give you my take on it. It really starts with self-love. Like, how much you love yourself, and what's that inner dialogue? Does it motivate you? Are you kind to yourself in that inner dialogue? The identity or self-image. Do you remember the successes that you have? How do you take care of your emotional energy? Because every time you've got to go and give in family, in work. So that emotional energy, how do you recover? How do you rejuvenate? When I say rejuvenate, remind yourself, why are you doing this? And also, how do you manage the ego? Because the ego is there and it has to be managed in a way. So that's that's my take on mental fitness. And I'd love to hear your take on mental fitness and how does it link to your take on joy?
You know, and I'll probably botch the quote, but I love the Viktor Frankl quote, from Man's Search for Meaning, where he says, between stimulus and response, there is a gap, and in that gap is our opportunity to choose. And the choices we make between stimulus and response make all the difference. And so we are constantly faced with, when you look at a situation, how will you interpret it? And if my team could add one more title on my business card, because it says CEO, it says Chief Storyteller, they'd probably have Chief Optimist. And, you know, I just take an optimistic view of life. I look at it and say, it's not hopeless. I mean, it's not blind optimism. I realize, optimism is actually a harder journey to sign up for, because if I say something optimistic, then I darn well be ready to sign up for the work that could make that optimistic future come true. Otherwise, it's just a pipe dream. Yeah. And so I think that combination of optimism and willingness to work hard for a worthy goal, and then being able to imagine, what does it look like? So I think that's a key component of my mental health and mental, forget what word.
Mental fitness.
Yeah. I think that's a really important part. The other thing I learned early on in my career is, for goodness sake, be careful who you hang around with. Mm-hmm. Because I used to go out to lunch with two very capable guys on my old team, and we'd have lunch every single day. And I will tell you, I would come back from that lunch so depressed that I think I probably should have been seeing a mental health professional for medication, because it was awful. I mean, we'd sit down and it's amazing how easily we can dive into the problems of the world, and this trend is going the wrong way, and we're going to hell in a handbasket. And I just come back from lunch and I'd just be so depressed I could barely think straight. And all I thought to myself was, Rich, you got to stop hanging around with these guys. Stop allowing your head to be filled with this. And so I just started choosing different people who inspired me, who encouraged me, who believed in me, people who had their own ideas, but they were positive direction ideas, not negative direction, people who probably shared some kind of optimism like me. That was a huge factor in making sure that that I was taking care of myself.
Yeah, the power of the energy you surround yourself with. That's one that we don't pay enough attention to. I certainly think that. It's so interesting, because when we talk about work and the system you create at work and the culture that springs out of that, it's almost as if for some, bonding is sharing complaints or, some of your views on what's not working and that sort of thing, as opposed to bonding is reimagining what's possible, like sending your energy there. Right. So,
and about 30 years ago, I just stopped watching the evening news.
Oh, yes.
Both local and nationally. And it's not like my head's buried in the sand and I don't know there are big problems going on in the world, but their job is to draw us in, to get us addicted to the most negative stories out there on the planet. And they have to do it in 30 minutes, and they really got to do it in about 15, because half of it's commercials anyways. And so they're just like filling your head with stuff that says, come back tomorrow and see how much worse it got. And I'm like, no, I mean, the trouble was I saw this cognitive dissonance in my mind of like, wait, if the world is that bad all the time, how come I'm not seeing it on every street corner? I grew up north of Detroit. Detroit has a lot of negative stories about it, and I still wasn't seeing it. And again, I'm not confused. There's bad things that happen in the world. I get that. But if all we're doing is being reminded of only those things, we're ignoring the 95% of good things that happen.
The hairs on the back of my neck are standing up, because we don't watch the news. I stopped watching the news around 9/11. When I was seeing the impact it was having on my mum, and I was just like, something's not right here. And the same as you, it's weird that I've not watched the news, and yet it's not like I have my head buried in the sand, because somehow information still comes. But you're right, in the news, if the world was that bad, we wouldn't be able to step out of our house the way that they just keep telling us all the bad stuff that happens again and again. Don't tell us anything good that happens. And that does something to your mind. Where you live.
Yeah, it constrains what you think is possible and kind of puts you in this fear state that then informs how you communicate and how you think. It's really, it's a challenging one to navigate. I wonder though, because you've built out this incredible movement that's global, right? Folks, especially with the virtual tours, I heard are tuning in from all over the world to get a behind the scenes look at what you've built in Menlo Innovations. So that increased demand, that increased attention, has that had any impact?
Oh yeah. I appreciate that. There was that third question. I wanted to get to it about ego, right? And absolutely, I have that. That is something that clearly needs to be kept in check. And just ask any of my daughters. And so my wife works for Menlo. And she will easily hunt me like a wounded animal in the forest when I screw up. And we have some really strong leaders at Menlo who aren't at all afraid. And I'm sure I've created an environment where they don't feel afraid. Maybe I should work on this a little bit, where they'll just come and like, boop, just hit me between the eyes and say, did you really say that yesterday? Did you really do that yesterday? Because guess what? I'm a real human being too, and I screw up all the time. And having a few people around me who are willing to call me on it, and I know it won't be everybody. There's no way. I mean, I'm still the fear-based CEO that everybody imagines I am, because I know I must be, because I'll say something like, hey, Chinazum, can we get together for a minute? I just have something I want to talk about. And all of a sudden you're like, what? What did I do? And I'm like, you think I'm going to fire you this afternoon? Come on. When was the last time anybody saw me do that? But there's just a natural fear associated with a top leader. Yes. And because it's there, you're always going to get a varnished version of the truth from your team members. But every once in a while, there's somebody who's willing to poke through that. And I have enough of those people on the team that keep me tied to the ground. And part of it too is, and we're still a small company, so there's only 50 of us at Menlo. I sit out in the room with everybody else. I don't have a corner office. I don't have a gifted C-suite. I'm literally on the same table, the kind of table we have that everybody else in the company has. And so I think that makes me more accessible, but also brings me down a little bit, where I'm not stepping into the office and then stepping up onto a throne from which I'm going to do my work. And the other part is, and I remember one time, middle of the day, one time in our old office, I was just going around emptying the garbage cans with all the little liners right in the middle of the day. And somebody of the team said, wait, you're the CEO. Why are you doing this? I said, well, it needed to be done. And you're all billing, so you're making me money while you're doing that. I'm not billing, so I got time to do this. And why not? And I always tell them, I say, I should never expect you guys to do something I'm not willing to do myself. Now, of course, that isn't always the best use of my time. And so we have a service we hire that out to. But sometimes there's extra special conditions. And, and I will tell you when, like we collect the pop cans that have returnable fees like we have here in Michigan. And if the bag that's in is full, my wife's the one to come over and say, hey, Rich, can you take those out to the recycle bin? So, there's that. Just knock them down a little bit.
There's nothing like managing your ego to just have your wife there to always keep you in check.
Hey, it's not in check. She's keeping you accountable. That's all.
Yeah. She's making you better, Chinazum.
That's how she tells me all the time when she.
And she doesn't need to be made better because she's perfect.
Oh.
Touché.
She's been married for many years, of course. She is perfect.
Oh my goodness.
The question I did also want to ask, Rich, was so much has happened since you wrote the book, the pandemic. Because when I first picked up your book was in the middle of the pandemic. Little did I know what the world was going to throw at us. We've had the Great Recession. We've got AI. We've got wars coming left, right, and center. It's a good thing we don't.
Supply chain, grand resignation, just you name it. It's like, wouldn't it have been neat if the pandemic was just like one thing?
Yeah, no, we've gotten that multiple effect.
Multiple effect. And I just feel now, as we look into the future, I feel now more than ever, we need joy. We need it so badly. And when you look into the future, how can we bring more joy, especially into work?
Well, this might be controversial, so, but you probably didn't expect anything less from me. I, like the Surgeon General of the United States, worry about mental health of the world. There's no question people are suffering, and they're suffering for all the reasons you just said, and all the reasons we talked about, right? They're filling their heads with all the negative news that's coming out of all the popular social media platforms. And even if they're looking at good stuff, they're comparing themselves to what somebody else has, and they don't have that, and they want that. And they're like, why am I being treated so unfairly, and that sort of thing. And then we're isolated now, right? So many of us are working from our home environments. And I think we humans are wired to be in connection with one another. We so need that. We're just built to be social creatures. And so we're back in the office now. I mean, we were away just like everybody else was for about 18 months to 2 years. And it was a slow and steady progression, but we're 5 days back in the office. That's almost universally true for all of us. And I will tell you, I've had people who resisted that on my team, even though that's the way we worked for the first 19 years. And now they're thanking me. And they're saying, I didn't understand how much I'd fallen into a funk about being away from people, that I'm not, leaving my home. I mean, there were some on the team who literally didn't leave their home at all. They had food shipped and everything. That's just not healthy for humans. And, you and I talked about this, and I offer up to people who question this. They're like, we feel more productive at home. I tell people, we have never cared about individual productivity. We always care about team effectiveness, and humans are better as a team working in collaboration with each other, especially on the complex problems that the world has today. There's very few simple problems left. And so we have to work with others to solve the problems we have. And we have to be learning all the time. And I challenge people on that. I say, if you know everything you need to know, you probably are going to be okay. But my company is always on the forefront. We're always having to learn new things. We have to build a learning organization. Of course, when I say that to anybody who walks through our doors, they're like, well, wait a minute, we need to be learning all the time too. I'm like, huh? And I said, imagine, you're building a learning organization. What word comes to mind? And they always say school. And I said, okay, if this whole work from home arrangement is so good for learning, why don't we just close all the school buildings and send all the kids home? Because I'm sure that'll work really well. I mean, imagine we had data to show us how well a work from home learning environment is for our children. And all of a sudden they're like, oh, we ran that experiment. We do have data. It's horrible. I'm like, So if we don't think that's good for our kids, why do we think it's good for our adults? And people say, well, our adults know what they need to know. Do they? Do they really? Like the kid right out of college who's getting his first job or her first job, they know everything they need. Well, I mean, no, we should have a better mentoring program. Really? Because when I hear from the young people who joined Menlo when we were doing this during the pandemic and trying to get people to come back in, the young people would say, Rich, why should I come back into the office if the person I'm pairing with is at home? It's a damn good question. And what do young people want? They want mentorship. They want real social networks, like with real human beings. They want to see the patterns of behavior. They want to catch the sidebar conversations. because that's where they're going to learn about what's important for their career. And so, I know this is controversial, but I'm just telling you, we're fooling ourselves if we think we can replicate all of that in a remote environment. And if you don't have enough critical mass of people in the office together, then you're going to get I come in and they're home, and they come in and I'm home, and it's like, okay, I don't know, this whole conversation may be seen as a quaint reminder of a time that won't be coming back again. We'll see in 5 years how my thoughts on this stand the test of time. But for me and us, we decided being together is more important than the convenience of working from home.
And you're speaking to two remote workers, two couldn't be on more of an opposing scale to you. We are like right here. But what I'm going to jump in is, I had this conversation with Rich a week ago where he blew my mind with this coming into the office. And I do think we have to reimagine what the office looks like. Because for us, we work as coaches, so we probably work with different groups. We're going to be in different networks.
Sure.
And I do agree that we need more connection, 100%. Because we started even thinking, like, we started craving wanting to meet people in person and go to these events. So much so that I nearly went all the way to New York just to meet somebody for an hour and a half. I was literally about to do that, and I had to stop and go, why am I doing this? But coming into one location for 5 days is just never going to work for me. I know that I can't go back to that. Only works for Menlo. But then when I started to think about the future, I was like, I need something where you can come in, like say the different group, because I work for probably different employers. So where you can come in and you have a dedicated space where people can come in if they need to, if it once a week, whatever. And then you also need to start creating those remote collaborations where I worked at a company where they did actually make remote really feel like you were connected, and they spent a lot of time using all these technology. So I think in the future, we do need connection, but the office of old, I don't know whether that serves that.
Well, I get it. Yeah. No, I absolutely understand that. Yep.
And Rich, I just want to add, like, yours is probably the first argument or proposal that's I've found interesting. And I have heard so many. And I, like Chinazam said, am usually a fan of remote. And I think at the core of it, it's because of your approach to it's so intentional. Like and combined with the flat structure, the openness, the focus on paired work, and that sense of innovation and efficiency, but also that accountability and that knowledge sharing, that all together creates this system that is a very specific environment to be in. I'd love to work in that environment. I'd come in, and you can put this on the record, I'd come in 5 days a week for that.
This is being recorded, baby. 5 days.
5 days a week, I'd come in for that. The problem
my careers team will be reaching out to you.
I'm going to play back this recording that you sent me.
in like a year's time. The problem, though, is that we've just taken it for granted, right? Like we have all these environments, and if for so many it's not working, we're no longer intentional about it.
Yeah.
We're taking our folks for granted. We're taking the environment for granted, and it's starting to have a negative, not positive impact on how we collaborate. But I think
that's the key word is intentionality. There's no question. The default cultures, what behaviors do we tolerate? Who walked in the door this morning? Who did we hire? How do we treat each other? And it all, and everything's accepted. That's not a culture. That's chaos. But defining what our behaviors are going to be, how we're going to communicate. And I'll be honest, I think the technology, as much better as it is, because, all of us remember torturous video calls pre-pandemic. I mean, it would typically take 15 minutes before every meeting just to get something like what we're doing. And now it's like that, right? Now we just take it for granted. Of course, we're going to do a video call. Why wouldn't we, right? But it's still not quite there yet.
Yeah.
And, just the ease with which we can find people, the ease Because what you need is, what we like lovingly refer to as high-speed voice technology. That ability to just say, hey, EJ. And I need to be able to do that kind of like that. I need to be able to at least sense that you're not heads down busy and can't be interrupted. That's something we should all be cognizant of. And we have that at Menlo too. But most of the time it's like, hey, Chinnism, hey, EJ, can I interrupt for you for a second? I've got something going on. I could really use your input on it. And that happens so easily in the room. And it's not quite that easy with technology. We made it easier. During the pandemic, we figured out a way to make that easier. But quite frankly, it was because even during the pandemic, we were in Zoom calls all day long. Everybody was in Zoom calls all day long. We just published the link. So if I needed to talk to the two of you and you were paired together, I could just click on your link and suddenly I'm in your Zoom call. And we even talked to Zoom about that. I'm like, well, that sounds like an invasion of privacy. Why would we allow you to do that? And we're like, yeah, we're a weird company. It would take a little explaining to why we'd want it to be like that. So.
Yeah.
Oh, fascinating. That was a good workaround, though. But I will say, I see now why you're called the chief storyteller. That was a very persuasive argument. I only ask that when you speak to the other captives of industry, that you give them the full story. You got to walk them through what you built.
Yes,
right. Of that.
No, absolutely. Yeah. Because, again, if people are just going to an office to put headphones on and be on Zoom all day, then stay home. For goodness sake, stay home. Yeah. Why would I torture myself with a commute to do that all day?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fair.
It's intentionality, I think, because also when I was talking with you, Rich, the way it evolved to the way you got to 5 days a week, it did actually evolve. People had
it was gentle.
Yeah.
We knew we couldn't just snap it back into place, even though that's the way we'd worked for 19 years, because brains have changed in that time.
Yeah.
Expectations had changed. So, yeah.
Powerful.
I think what I'd love to just leave to the world is let's be intentional about coming in, but also how can you create the remote possibility as well? Because technology,
how can you add intentionality to the remote environment? That's probably the key thing.
Yeah.
I remember when I actually came to Ann Arbor and we had the most amazing offsite, and the guy who was running it for us, there's this thing called OWL, meeting.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I remember thinking there were people who weren't there, but it felt like they were there. And it was just such an amazing experience. So it started to make me think that when you actually, if you're intentional, you can make the remote experience good as well.
Yeah.
Right. All right. We are coming to the end. We could keep going, but IJ, do you have a question? You look like you have a question.
No, this was, there's a lot that we touched on and I'm just digesting it. I'm just so grateful to have had the opportunity to have this conversation, because there's some things that you hit on, Rich, that aren't talked about enough in the business context at all, both in terms of for the individual and for the collective, like what you're building and the importance of all of that and what you're trying to create as a business. So it's funny, we've kind of done all this, we've put things into little boxes. It's like, it's a personal problem. That's not the same. It's not important, but actually it's that integratedness that it's the fluidity and the flow of all of that. And it can start with the individual and then it flows out to the environment you create, to the relationships, the way you lead. And so I'm just really inspired by this conversation. I just wanted to say thank you.
Well, you guys this is fun. See, you pair, right? You interviewed me.
You did.
Yeah.
You did.
We always like to ask, so if you can leave one thing that you want to share with the world around mental fitness, but in this case, it can be joy, that you want to leave with our viewers, what would that be?
I just have this fundamental belief. I have a strong faith walk that I believe God made us to, in a very specific way, to number one, work hard. We are built to work hard. Everything about our bodies says we are geared for work. We are social creatures. Like I said before, we are built to work together. And we are built to be purpose driven. We are built to work on something bigger than ourselves. That's what inspires us every single day. That's why we come to work. And when we talk about purpose at Menlo, we answer two fundamental questions. Who do you serve? And what would delight look like for them? So our idea of purpose should be not self-serving, it should serve others. And I think when we are in that mode, when we've built an organization that works hard, works together, and works on something for others, that is, for me, that's an environment that is joyful.
Powerful.
That's so powerful. That is so powerful. All right, Rich, it has been, I can't thank you enough from the bottom of my heart. It's been such a pleasure. I can't tell you how much our previous conversation, this conversation has really inspired me. And I hope when our viewers listen to this, it's really going to inspire them as well. But before we go, is there something that you want to, that we can help you promote, or something that's coming that you want with our viewers?
Yeah, if I mean, obviously the books inspired you. So, I've written 2 books on this subject, one in 2013, one in 2018. So I have found that the books have created a lot of connections for me in the world. So I would certainly encourage your listeners to read my books. If you're inspired enough to want to come visit Menlo, you can do it either in person. We're conducting all kinds of tours. We teach classes and what we've learned over the past 20 years. But you don't need to get in an airplane anymore, because we learned how to do virtual tours during the pandemic. So we have people coming from all over the world still to this day. It's one of those things we learned to do during the pandemic, and why on earth would we stop doing it just now that we're back in the office? So you're literally a click of a link away, and those are free. We do 2 free virtual tours a month, so people can come and visit and ask the questions they have of our team members.
Well, so I'm definitely going to put in our show notes, I'm going to put the books, the 2 amazing books, and I'm going to put the links if people want to do the virtual tour, also if they want to book to come and see in person as well.
Yes.
Well, Rich, I definitely thank you so much, and we'll keep spreading that joy and keep this prototype that you've created, because you showed that it does work, and work should actually be joy instead of a lot of other places.
It is possible. We're a living, breathing example of it.
For sure. Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
And that brings us to the end of another insightful episode of Real Talk. We hope you've enjoyed today's discussion and have gained valuable insights into enhancing your mental well-being and productivity. Now, before we wrap things up, we have an exciting opportunity for you. Are you curious about your mental fitness score? Want to know how you can improve your overall well-being and boost your productivity? Well, we have just the thing for you. Head over to our show notes, where you will find a link to our exclusive mental fitness quiz. It's a quick and easy assessment that will provide you with a personalized score and actionable steps to enhance your general well-being and productivity. It's like having a personal coach in your pocket. And don't forget to subscribe to Real Talk on your favorite podcast platform. By subscribing, you'll be the first to know when we release new episodes filled with valuable discussions, expert interviews, and practical tips for leading a fulfilling life. You can also connect with me, Chinazom, on social media. Follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook for daily inspirations, updates on upcoming episodes, and behind-the-scenes peeks into the Real Talk community. Remember, your mental well-being matters, and taking small steps towards improvement can make a significant difference in your life. We're here to support you on your journey. Thank you for tuning in today, and a special thank you to all our listeners who have joined us on this incredible podcasting adventure. Your support means the world to us. Until next time, keep striving for a better version of yourself. Take care and stay mentally fit.